Hi Founder fans, Jason here, and today we are discussing Federal Farmer number 8, the 8th in our series of observations that were written by the Anti-Federalist, the Federal Farmer, an anonymous person who was probably Melancton Smith, back during the constitutional ratification process. Now, I've been bringing you papers from the Anti-Federalist for almost a year now, and this is one of the most fascinating ones I've come across. Now, long story short, what the Federal Farmer is arguing is that the Constitution is covering too much area. The United States is too big a place with too many people of all different backgrounds for one consolidated government to actually really respond to the needs and desires and interests of the people at large. It's a fairly common anti-federalist argument, but he comes at it from a very different angle. Usually they quote Montesquieu. This paper, however, seems to quote Jean-Louis Delhomme. I'm not sure exactly how to pronounce it. He actually misspells it in the paper itself. Delhomme, I believe it's pronounced, was from Geneva, but ends up moving to Britain and was a contemporary of the American founders, who was one of the world's most respected constitutional scholars at the time. So it is interesting that the Federal Farmer decides to quote him instead of Montesquieu, whose arguments about too big a republic is usually the default of the Anti-Federalists. So that being said, let's talk about what it says right next to me, the benefits of nobility. So the Federal Farmer uses this entire paper to compare England to ancient Rome. Now, it's no secret many of the founders really liked ancient Rome, and it's interesting because he takes kind of an anti-ancient Rome government stance when it comes to representing the people. And he takes, even more fascinatingly, a pro-British stance on representing the people. I'll remind you that when the American Revolution broke out, the Americans weren't fighting to not be British anymore. They were fighting for what they called their rights as Englishmen. You see that phrase pop up over and over again during the years leading up to the American Revolution. They wanted the freedoms that English people had because everyone seemed to think Britain, especially England, was the most free country in the world. So Federal Farmer actually gives a bit of a history lesson in this conversation. He goes to the beginning. He starts with the Norman invasion of England, and he says that the people in England were actually free before then. Now, this is arguable. There were kings, there were serfs at that point. It was pretty much the Middle Ages, so that's not entirely true. But even serfs in Old England, he believed, were free. But they did have certain freedoms, so that when the Normans invaded from the continent of Europe, the people living then remembered the freedoms they had, and they continued fighting for it through the Magna Carta, through creating a constitutional monarchy. Through centuries, the people of England, as he says, kind of by chance of history, are able to secure certain freedoms. And the first and most important among this is the representation of the people. Additionally, the limitations on the monarchy itself. Those two things combined he thought were very important. And it's very interesting because the Federal Farmer, in this essay, or observation as he called it, he goes into detail about how nobility is really good for the freedom of the people. And he says this because you have, in all republics, all governments, for the most part, you should have, in a free government, an executive, what he calls a monarch, an aristocracy, which are the elite, and then the democratic sort. And in Britain, what seems to have happened is you have the monarch, but their power is limited. You have the House of Lords, which is made up of the aristocracy, and then you have the House of Commons, which is made up of people elected by the people themselves. But since the people in the House of Commons can't be aristocracy, that means they are by default regular people, often more wealthy regular people, of course, but still closer to the regular people than to the nobility. There's a very fine line, a very important difference between it that everyone sees, which means the people in the House of Commons have more in common, no pun intended, with the people at large. They share the interests of the people at large more than they share the interests of the aristocracy and the House of lords. And therefore, the people themselves are much better represented. It is a fascinating position to take as someone who just overthrew the British monarchy that the federal farmer was a part of. Now, he then goes into ancient Rome, and again, the founders loved ancient Rome. Washington fancied himself a Cincinnatus, and there are a lot of fun characters in ancient Rome to look back on fondly. Now, personally, I have not put nearly as much study into ancient Rome as I have to the American Revolution, but as I said, it's no secret that the founders admired Rome and the Roman Republic for many reasons. However, Federal Farmer comes out and says there's a major difference between what was going on in England leading up to the 18th century when he was writing and what was going on in ancient Rome. In ancient Rome, they had a consul, which was like a king, and they had senators, which was like the House of Lords. But then they had tribunes as opposed to the House of Commons. And tribunes, as he said, there were only about 10 of them. They covered a much wider expanse of land. He notes several times that it was easy for England to be on an island to create a free government, as opposed to Rome, that was just gigantic with the land it covered. And he discusses how these tribunes, they were so sparse and spread out that the people who were elected to represent the people in the tribunes were essentially the wealthiest there. They had more in common with the aristocracy of ancient Rome than the general people of ancient Rome. Of course, Rome had many layers of society. Britain, of course, did too, but they are substantially different. I'm not going to get too much into that right now, but suffice to say that these tribunes did not have enough people represented in the government. It was only a small group of representatives of the people who were supposed to send word to the aristocracy and the consuls leading the charge, and their opinions, the opinions of the tribune, were basically ignored, and the tribunes themselves didn't really represent the people because, as I said, the people in the tribunes were trying to make their way up into the aristocracy, which was fairly possible in Rome, was very, very difficult in Great Britain at the time. And the Federal Farmer uses these two examples and compares them, and as I said at the beginning, it's a long way around of saying the United States, under this Constitution, will have more in common with ancient Rome than with Great Britain, because the people are so many people, they are spread so far apart, the population's growing, we're going to expand west, everyone knew it at the time. And what's going to happen, according to the Federal Farmer, is the members of the House of Representatives will become a political class who will have more in common with the people in the United States Senate than they will with the people at large. And I will leave it up to you to decide if that prophecy has come true or not. Suffice to say, I should also note that even in the Federalist Papers, I believe it was Madison, argues that the United States Senate, originally we didn't elect senators. They were appointed by the states, and they were supposed to be chosen because they were statesmen. They were supposed to be aristocrats. They were supposed to represent the House of Lords in England. And what the authors of the Constitution were saying is that the people in the House of Representatives were supposed to be similar to England's House of Commons. It was supposed to be representative of the people. And the fear was, from the Federal Farmer and many other anti-federalists, is that in a republic this large, that would simply be impossible with a House of Representatives that had such a small number in it. So that is a brief summation of one of the most fascinating papers I've ever read. I do hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, definitely hit like. It's the best thing you do for this channel. If you're new here, subscribe. I put out videos about the Anti-Federalist papers each Friday, and the other 6 days of the week, regular old American founders. So thank you very much, and I'll be back with a regular old founder for you tomorrow.